In Christianity and in Bible, there are all three times that are mentioned, and quite importantly, the Bible talks about lots about the past, and that's why our faith is remembering faith, and it talks about the present, that where we are now. But I think the Bible's strongest emphasis is in the future, that we are people of hope. We look forward to the future. And Psalm 68 that we read a part of, that has really all these three elements, the past and present, because it talks about future glory based on the past and the present. I have to add, though, as some interpreters consider actually it's talking about present glory, and if you read some other translations, it might translate that way. But I think our translation is correct to consider it as future. And it is titled as David's Psalm, which means it is a little bit different from the psalm that we read on the Ascension Day, on Thursday, which is during the time of exile. So they didn't have the kingdom, and they were looking forward to the restoration of the kingdom. But this is the time when David is the king. So he's not looking for the future kingdom in a sense, but he is also looking forward to the future kingdom, because he knows that his kingdom is not perfect. So he knows that God will be glorified even more, and God's kingdom will be a greater kingdom in the future. So he's looking forward to a better kingdom as he writes this psalm. Because it says, God shall arise and his enemies shall be scattered. Again, this is in the future tense in our translation, and I think that's correct. God is going to arise. He is now already in high place, but it's going to be done even more in the future. And it says his enemies will be scattered. His enemies are mentioned here. And naturally, because we are talking about God being triumphant, God having victory. And if we are talking about victory, of course, because there are enemies, that he can have a victory. Even in the sports games, we cannot win the game unless there's an opponent. If somebody says, well, as the season starts in June, the Port Power or Cross won the game, then you will ask, okay, against whom? Because there you can win the game only if there's an opponent. In the same way, God will be triumphed because there are his enemies. And there are his enemies because this world is in trouble. All the problems we have in this world is because there are enemies. We are having this service here in Zoom because of coronavirus. While we are thankful for this service, lots of people have died because of coronavirus. Coronavirus is God's enemy. But most importantly, as our second reading from Peter's letter says, our accuser, the devil, is the great enemy of God. And all those who follow him, are human enemies of God, and they will be scattered. Not only scattered, but in the next part, it says, as wax melts before a fire. So this will be a complete defeat for the enemies. Or if it's a complete defeat for the enemies, then it is complete victory for God. But the righteous shall be glad and exult before God. He mentions that after the defeat of the enemies, which means the righteous people, and righteous people are those people who follow God, will be glad when God's enemies are defeated. Because as I said, all the problems of the world come from the enemies of God. So if God's enemies are defeated, then we will have much better, much more peaceful world. And we see the defeat of God's enemies in our everyday life, in the present. And we are glad whenever it happens. But at the same time, in the future, there will be a time that they will be defeated completely as wax melts before a fire. Then we will be elated. We will be just so glad that we cannot express it in words. And on that basis, the psalmist says, oh, sing to God, sing praises to his name. When God is victorious, when the enemies are defeated, then it will be a great occasion for us to praise him. And because we are looking forward to that time already, and we are seeing some of that already, we can even sing praises to him now, because God is going to be victorious. And it describes God more, so that we can know what we are really praising God for. It says he is the father of the fatherless. He upholds the cause of the widow. If God fights against his enemies, then that means God protects those who are victims of his enemies. And the fatherless, orphans, and the widows are the enemies of the victims of his enemies, because death is one of the great enemies of God. Death was not supposed to be here, except because for the human sins, because of the human sins, death came here. So death is the enemy. So the fatherless and widows are the victims of God's enemies. Furthermore, fatherless and widows have a hard life because our society really are not really so gentle to them, do not care enough for them. Partly because maybe we are so busy, or partly because we have some biases against them, or whatever. So they are the victims of social injustice, which is also God's enemy. So God protects those who are victims of God's enemies. And after saying this, right after that, he says, God in his holy dwelling place. So God being in the holy dwelling place is connected to him being the father of the fatherless and the cause of the widow. Because it is part of God's character, it's part of God's holiness that he cares for those who are disadvantaged in this world, those who are poor, who are suffering injustice. Then he further explains it by saying he gives the desolate a home to dwell in and brings the prisoners out into the prosperity. Again, God is in the side of those who are disadvantaged. But you might be a little bit uneasy about the prisoners being mentioned, because you might think, oh, prisoners are not disadvantaged ones. They are there because of their own crimes. Well, this is the time before prison was used as a punishment for crime. So prisoners here means the war prisoners, those who were captured in the war, those who are captives of other people because they couldn't fight well. And it is important that we know this present thing, that God is really God who cares for those who are disadvantaged, who are suffering. But also it is important because if you want to be sure about the present, that we look back to the past, that God has done this in the past. Because God has done this in the past, we know that God does that in the present now too. So he talks about when you went out before your people. And when he talks about this, he's talking about the Exodus, God bringing people out of Egypt. And that's why he calls God as God of Sinai in this psalm. And explains that more than what we read, because we didn't read the whole psalm. But even in what we read, we can see the essence of what he's talking about here. He says, the earth shook, the heavens poured down water. So when God really works for his people, God does a great deliverance of his people. Even the nature is moved by that. It's such a great work. And he says, you prepare the land of your possession. And this is what God does for his people. He prepared the land of his possession for the people of God. He provides for them. And this is what happened for the people of Israel. He prepared the land. And for other people of God, he does similar things. In the place that your goodness had made ready for the poor. And when he talks about this possession for his people, again, he calls his people the poor. So he sees his God's people as the victim of injustice. Israel, it is natural because Israel was slaves in Egypt before that. So God really takes care of those who are suffering injustice, suffering evil, suffering by God's enemies. Then after explaining more about this Exodus and how God dealt with his people further after the Exodus, he comes to the conclusion of this psalm, in which we also read in today's reading. Sing to God, you kingdom of the earth. So while he talked about the people of Israel mainly, he says, you kingdom of the earth, sing to God. So it is what God did to the people of Israel is really good occasion for all people, not just for the people of Israel. All nations can praise now. Because what he did shows that God cares for the poor, as he described Israel as the poor. And it means also those people that God counts as his people, his loved ones. And we can see from our gospel reading that all those who follow Jesus are counted as God's people. So we are, what God did to Israel is good news for us because God will do the same thing to us as well. Because the good news is for all. And that's why in our first reading, in the Acts reading, God gave the command saying Jesus gave the words saying that there will be witness to the end of the earth. Because it is true that this good news is for everyone, not just for the people of Israel. And he describes God as he says, sing to God, to him who rises up on the highest heaven. So God rises up in the highest heaven means that God is God of glory and power. He is a great God. Then he says, in the part that I missed out in the pew sheet, I'm sorry about that, terrible is God. And I wonder why the translator used this expression, because this is old expression. Terrible in the modern English has a negative connotation. In other translations, modern translations, it usually says awesome. Or I would even say awe-inspiring might be even better word. God is awesome. God really inspires awe upon us. And that's who our God is. And it says the God of Israel, who gives power and strength to his people. Again, he emphasized that God gave power to his people. Because when God gave power to Israel, it shows that God will give power to all who follow him, not just the ethnic people of Israel. So this is something that should be emphasized, that God gives power to his people. And he finishes the psalm saying, blessed be God. One more better words are there than saying this. Blessed be God, or praise be to God, or glory be to God. Because after all, what matters is that God's name is glorified. God's name is blessed. So let's talk about past, present, and future, but I will talk about present first. God is just God, and God hates his enemies, the evil. And therefore, it defends the victims of evil, victims of injustice. God is on the side of who suffer from injustice. And past, this is the fact that God is not just theoretical, but we have numerous examples of how God dealt with his people, how God was on the side of the poor. God helped the people of Israel, and God helped people who looked to him. So past really gives assurance to us about the present and future. But as I said, future is probably the most important thing. Not only is God just on the side of the poor now, but God will complete his work in the future. God will triumph. His enemies will lose at the end. The Satan will be defeated. And along with Satan, all the injustice and death and all the sin. So let us rejoice on this and praise God. And one more better word to finish this sermon with the words of Psalmist himself. Blessed be God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.